I know in a few days, actually, you'll be hearing from Tom DeFrank, who's written a new book based upon many, many years of once private conversations that he had with the president. I'll just give you one little teaser. In that book, which I've had the privilege of reading, Tom recounts a 1997 discussion that he had with the president about a friend whose name shall go unmentioned. Not a friend in Grand Rapids, needless to say, but anyway, about a friend's adultery. And DeFrank quoted back to the president a colleague's assessment of Gerald Ford as the only guy he'd ever worked for who had not strayed beyond his marital vows. And this is what President Ford replied. You have to think of the 10 bad things that could happen to you from something like that, and the one good thing, and tell yourself the one good thing will get taken care of some other way. Now, I would call that sage advice. I can think of some White Houses where that probably should have been embroidered and carved in the mantle. Anyway, during his first term in Congress, Ford was named to the House Committee on Public Works. Pretty lowly position, except, guess what? The White House is falling down. And one day, President Truman invited the committee to come on down, and he gave them a personal tour, extraordinary, a personal tour of the White House. One corner of the East Room ceiling sagged 18 inches. Margaret Truman's piano threatened to come crashing through an upstairs floor at any time. Clearly something had to be done, and fast. President Truman urged the committee to preserve the exterior walls of the old house and rebuild the interior. Putting aside his usual tight-fisted conservatism, Ford took the president at his word. And it was the beginning of a relationship that actually lasted beyond Truman's death in 1972, because in 1976, Bess Truman made no secret of the fact that she voted for Gerald Ford. And Mrs. Truman stayed very close to the Fords as long as she lived. Remember, I think Ford is at a very kind of formative age as a young congressman in Washington. And what's he looking at? I mean, what's his model of the presidency? It's not FDR, who's left the scene. It's Harry Truman, this peppery, plain-spoken, not terribly eloquent, but terribly sincere, and above all, authentic man. We think of Truman, quite understandably, as someone who could be very partisan. And it certainly was in the 1948 campaign. But at the very same time, he is the father of modern bipartisan foreign policy, along with Arthur Vandenberg of Grand Rapids. Vandenberg famously said to the president, "If you want us there for the landing, be sure to include us in the takeoff." And those homely words really sparked the Truman Doctrine, aid to Greece and Turkey, NATO, the Berlin airlift. I mean, that amazingly creative period of American foreign policy when I think, frankly, we're entitled to feel nostalgic given the bitter polarization that affects foreign policy and almost every other policy today. But it was Harry Truman and Arthur Vandenberg, and here's this young congressman, Gerald Ford, who's watching keenly and I think learning in the process. It's very interesting because in those days, you know, these bourbon-swilling oligarchs, the old bulls, ran Congress. No one made any pretense that it was a democratic institution with a small d. On the other hand, it ran pretty well under people like Sam Rayburn. And what happened was there was this very unofficial system where the old bulls kept an eye out for young talent. They were interested in constantly replenishing themselves. And both parties, very early on, decided that Gerald Ford was a promising newcomer. He impressed elders by the questions he asked and by the thick volumes of committee testimony that he took home to read in his spare hours. In 1954, Democratic Congress, he's told, be outside room such and such at 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning. That's it. He does as he's told, and it turns out that he is being asked to join with 5 senior members who constitute the oversight of the nation's foreign intelligence, CIA and related agencies. No staff, no notes are taken, and there was never a leak. And what happened was these old bulls and this young calf basically locked themselves in with the head of the CIA and other foreign intelligence agencies and fired questions until all of their questions were answered. And it worked. It worked pretty well. That's why after the craze of Sputnik 50 years ago, when NASA was established, Gerald Ford was asked to be on the oversight committee of the American space program. And that's why there's a statue of a spaceman out there. There's also a statue of a spaceman out there because President Ford didn't want a statue of himself. But in lieu of that, he was very proud of his association with the American space program. That's why in November 1963, remember, before Ford becomes minority leader, he's just a Republican congressman. Lyndon Johnson calls him the weekend after John F. Kennedy's assassination and browbeats him into being on the Warren Commission. I will tell you something that I don't think has ever appeared in print. Not long before he died, the president, well, you may know, accepted the John F. Kennedy Library's Profiles in Courage Award. And while he was there, he did an oral history. I learned about it later on. And of course, the question was asked about Lee Harvey Oswald and how the Warren Commission did its work and what motives they thought were at work. And President Ford said something quite remarkable, which I don't think he ever said publicly. And I don't really think I'm talking out of school at this point. But the theory, a theory, that was bandied about among the commission members was that Oswald's wife, who was a piece of work, although not as much as his mother, had been riding her husband pretty badly for very intimate reasons, namely his alleged impotence. And Lee Harvey Oswald was going to show Marina just how much of a man he was by shooting the President of the United States. It didn't appear in the text of the Warren Commission, but it was something widely discussed among the commission members. Anyway, by 1973, with Richard Nixon in real trouble, and Spiro Agnew resigning the vice presidency, the president has to find a replacement, and fast, and it has to be someone who can be confirmed. It can't be John Connally, who was his first choice. Nelson Rockefeller would split the Republican Party. Ronald Reagan would split the Republican Party from a different direction. It has to be someone that Congress will buy, and there aren't many people at that point. And it's the Democrats, it's Carl Albert and it's Mike Mansfield, who tell the president, if you want someone who can be confirmed, who enjoys our trust, nominate Gerald Ford. And that's what the president did.